Turning uncertainty into competitive advantage. Never mind the conventional wisdom.
Have the courage of your convictions. Power of authenticity.
Embrace adversity and learn from failure. Keep calm and trust yourself.
I grew up in Ireland, and back in the early to mid 80s, there wasn't much going on. You know, it was pretty bleak in terms of prospects. So we're kind of looking at what I should do in terms of a career. And food seems to be one of those things that, you know, is not going to go out of fashion. You know, food, you know, people are not going to ever grow tired of it. There will be trends and things will come and go, but people are always going to need to eat and drink. And there are a lot of other things I could have done. I studied industrial microbiology. I could have done biotech. I could have done genetic engineering. In hindsight, they were not bad bets. But food seemed to be pretty certain to me. So I wanted to really understand food. I came to Reading University, came over to the UK, then studied food science there. And that's how I kind of carried from there. I met this guy called Andrew Palmer when he came to Reading to ask some questions about his project. And that's really where the whole new Covent Garden Soup Company idea came from. So really, you know, I was a techie. I went to university and I came straight out of university without any experience and started a food company. So there was no kind of, you know, long process, a long drawn out process or predetermined process. Serendipity. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, Carol. That's how it all happened.
So when you're actually, so then you created the new Covent Garden Food Company. What would you say, because other people who are interested in your entrepreneurship skills, what would you say, John, were your challenges actually while you were doing that?
Yeah, and listen, I think it's important just to explain a little bit about how this whole thing came about, right? Like I say, I was at Reading University and I met this guy, Andrew. It was Andrew's idea. And you know, we got chatting literally, and we went down the pub at lunchtime to talk about this, and we were still kicked out at closing time because we were still there arguing about this whole thing. And the whole idea was really novel. It was like talking about putting fresh soup into a carton. So the whole point about it was nobody did it before. And I guess the only way we could answer all the questions that we had more question marks than answers, was to go and do it ourselves. So the whole premise was about putting soup into a carton, not into a can. I'll take you back to 1987. And this is the big challenge, really, in answer to your question. 1987, all liquid soup was in a can. Yeah. So, you know, it was pretty normal. You'd buy liquid soup in a can, or you'd make it yourself, or you'd buy it in a restaurant. That was the only way to consume liquid soup. The problem with putting it in a can is you ruin all the nutritional composition and you ruin all the flavor profile, you know, of the soup that's in it. We wanted our soup to, funnily enough, if you like, taste of the ingredients we put into the product, rather than the process that was used to make it safe, which is what canning is. So canning takes the ingredients, puts it into, you know, into a can, and then heats it at high temperatures for a relatively long period of time. Makes it safe, gives it 18 months. That's why it's got a long shelf life. It sits on the ambient shelf, and you go and buy it and you keep it at home, and it's very convenient. We wanted to change all that though. We didn't want to provide a product to those people who were happy buying canned soup because they were obviously happy buying it with the quality that they got from that. We were targeting the people who were fed up with canned soup, who wanted something much better, who wanted stuff that you could make at home or buy in a restaurant, but didn't have the time or the skills to make it themselves. So convenience was key. So we wanted the product to be convenient. We wanted it to be fresh. We wanted it to have a short shelf life. And we wanted it to be to taste much more of the ingredients we use to put into the product rather than the process. And that was the big challenge. We had to design the entire process from scratch. We couldn't find anybody to go to say, can you make this soup for us? Like you do a lot of the time these days, like an outsourced model. Nobody put fresh soup. Nobody made fresh soup. Certainly nobody put liquid soup in a carton or anything but a can. The answer would be, how big do you want the can to be? So we had to go and do it ourselves. And that was the biggest challenge, dreaming up a process that would actually deliver the flavor of the ingredients into the end product, would actually be safe as well, of course, because we were told it wouldn't work. We were told by so many experts that it just would not work in so many different ways. And so that was the size of the challenge that we faced at the time. Not knowing anything about soup, about the food industry, about business, about anything, because I was straight out of university. So that combined with all of the other things we were trying to do, that was the main challenge back then, 1987, 1988.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. And as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, you're a real entrepreneur at heart. So it's actually in the blood. Were you like this as a child? Or did you see entrepreneurial traits as a child? Were you selling sweets in school for threepence or something or other? I don't know. You hear of those kinds of stories from other entrepreneurs.
You absolutely do. I hear it a lot. And you know, quite frankly, I couldn't spell the word entrepreneur. I had no idea what entrepreneurship was about. You know, I studied, as I say, food science and industrial microbiology. How specific can you get that, and how technical can you get that? I was a techie. I was a scientist. But yeah, at the opposite end of the spectrum to what an entrepreneur was meant to be. You know, the scientist is all about first principles and all about testing things to the nth degree and coming up with theories and testing those and taking tiny steps to prove what you think you know. And entrepreneurship is the opposite. It's gut feel, it's creativity, it's having a go, it's having enough insight to think, I know what I'm doing. I don't really, but I'm going to prove it by actually doing it. And the two are so far apart. So I didn't have any grounding or you know, traditional upbringing or experience in entrepreneurship. And when I met Andrew, it was like a whole new world was open to me, because he was the ultimate entrepreneur. I learned a lot from him, except for one thing I'd say in my defense, I suppose, is I grew up on a farm in the west of Ireland. My dad was a farmer, and you don't often think of entrepreneurs being farmers or farmers being entrepreneurs, but you do get at a very early age, you get a very quick grounding in the practical aspects of life. You know, you're at the whim of the weather, and the weather is very unpredictable in Ireland. You know, anything can happen. Harvests can be ruined. Things can come and go very, very quickly. I think you learn that element of being down to earth and responding and reacting as quickly as you can, and taking life as it comes, not taking things personally. And you know, when you're knocked over, stand up, brush yourself off, and carry on again. And I think there's a lot of that resilience that you know, that an entrepreneur needs to dig in and needs to rely upon. So I think, without knowing it, a lot of that came from that early years in Ireland growing up. But the whole world was new to me when I started off with Covent Garden and Andrew and myself. It was a huge experience, a huge adventure. We learned a huge amount going through that whole 10 years of Covent Garden.